Chapter 3, Bad Berries. As Pearl and her mother walked down Main Street, Pearl's flip-flops smacked against the sidewalk, the rhythm echoing off the brick buildings. Sunshine sparkled in the morning sky. A gray squirrel scampered up a lamp-post. A pair of pigeons flew out of the way. "Pearl, slow down," her mother called after her. "I don't want to be late," she answered, her ponytail swinging with each eager step. "And I don't want to twist my ankle." Mrs. Petal waved at Mr. Bundle, an old man who was sitting on a bench outside the Buttonfill barber shop. He scowled and didn't wave back, most likely because he hadn't forgiven Pearl for riding her bike over his foot earlier that year. She had been trying to follow a butterfly and hadn't noticed the outstretched limb. He limped for 2 whole months. Pearl passed right by Mrs. Nod, who was unlocking the door to the Buttonville bookstore. "Hello," Mrs. Pearl greeted as she approached. Mrs. Nod peered over the rims of her red glasses. "I have not changed my mind," she said, blocking the doorway with her outstretched arms. "Pearl is still banned." Pearl hadn't meant to get banned from the bookstore, but there was no sign in the store that read, "Don't climb the bookshelves." How was she supposed to know that if one bookshelf tipped, the rest would fall like dominoes? "Well, I hope you'll change your mind," Mrs. Petal told Mrs. Nod. "Pearl certainly loves your bookstore." As she continued down the street, Mrs. Petal greeted everyone she passed, but Pearl didn't bother to say hello to anyone. She was in a hurry. And besides, some days it felt as if the entire town was mad at her for something or other. "She's a troublemaker," people would whisper behind her back. Pearl thought it wasn't fair to call someone a troublemaker when that someone didn't get into trouble on purpose. But Dr. Wu wasn't mad at Pearl, and she didn't think Pearl was a troublemaker, and that was all the more reason why Pearl wanted to arrive on time. With her mother close behind, Pearl charged around the corner and headed up First Street. A car driving toward them suddenly turned into a parking spot, its tires screeching. The driver's window opened and a woman stuck out her head. "Yoo-hoo! Yoo-hoo!" Pearl knew that voice. The sound was worse than fingernails on a chalkboard, worse than a cat upchucking a hairball, worse than a dentist's drill. It was a voice that left scratch marks in the air. It belonged to Mrs. Martha Mulberry, Buttonville's busiest busybody. She squeezed through the car window until she was half hanging out, her red hair dangling in long, frizzy ropes. "Where are you two going this morning?" "Nowhere," Pearl said, not slowing down. It was best not to talk to Mrs. Mulberry. That woman could smell a secret 10 miles away. And once she uncovered a secret, she never kept it. In fact, Mrs. Mulberry gave away secrets as if they were pieces of candy on Halloween. "Nowhere?" Mrs. Mulberry narrowed her eyes. Certainly you are going somewhere." "We're going to meet Dr. Wu," Mrs. Petal said. Pearl skidded to a stop. Drat! Her mother had spilled the beans. "Dr. Wu?" Mrs. Mulberry squeezed back into the car, threw open the door, then scrambled out. Dressed in red overalls, she looked like a huge radish. She hurried up to Mrs. Petal and stood facing her, her hands perched on her hips. "Why are you going to meet Dr. Wu?" Before Mrs. Petal could answer, Pearl pushed between the two women. "No reason," she said. "Just a friendly visit." She grabbed her mother's hand and tried to pull her down the sidewalk, but Mrs. Mulberry stood in the way. "If you are going to meet Dr. Wu, then I must go with you," Mrs. Mulberry said. "No way," Pearl blurted. "You can't go with us." "Don't be rude," Mrs. Petal whispered to her daughter. "Can't go with you? That's absurd," Mrs. Mulberry said. "I've been trying to meet Dr. Wu ever since I learned that she'd moved into the old button factory. As president of the Welcome Wagon, it is my job to welcome her to town." She pointed to the words "Welcome Wagon," which were embroidered on the front of her red baseball cap. "I tried to get in on Saturday and then again on Sunday, but the gate was locked. I yelled her name, but no one answered. Then I heard a strange noise coming from the old factory. It sounded like a growl. It probably was a growl, Pearl thought. A Sasquatch growl. But how could she keep Mrs. Mulberry from suspecting such a thing? Dogs growl, Pearl pointed out. Maybe someone's dog was on the loose. Or maybe it wasn't a growl after all. Maybe it was a branch swaying in the wind. Growl or no growl, I'm going with you, Mrs. Mulberry insisted. Mrs. Mulberry would ruin everything. Dr. Wu was trying to keep her hospital for imaginary creatures a secret. What if Mrs. Mulberry pushed her way in? She was a very pushy person. And what if she caught a glimpse of an imaginary creature? You can't go with us because we have an appointment and you don't, Pearl said, jutting out her chin. An appointment? Mrs. Mulberry leaned close to Pearl. Her breath smelled like coffee. Why do you have an appointment with Dr. Wu? Before Pearl could come up with a false reason, Mrs. Petal smiled proudly and said, Dr. Wu has asked Pearl to be her apprentice. Mrs. Mulberry snorted. Why would Dr. Wu want Pearl to be her apprentice? Doesn't she know that Pearl is a difficult child? Mrs. Petal's smile faded. She wrapped her arm around her daughter's shoulders and glared at Mrs. Mulberry. She's not a difficult child. She's a wonderful child. Wonderful? Mrs. Mulberry snorted again. Wonderful children do not ring the town hall bell at the crack of dawn. I wanted to see if the dogs would start howling, Pearl explained. Wonderful children do not leave puddles of ice cream on the sidewalk, Mrs. Mulberry said. I was trying to see which flavor melted fastest, Pearl pointed out. Wonderful children do not cut the roses off other people's rose bushes. I said I was sorry, Pearl told her, having no exceptional explanation for that particular behavior. She simply wanted some flowers for her mother. We gave you a new rose bush. A dollar store rose bush can never replace a rose bush from a gardening catalog, Mrs. Mulberry said with a roll of her eyes. Mrs. Petal's cheeks turned red. You have a right to your opinion, Martha, but your opinion is wrong. Dr. Wu thinks Pearl is wonderful, and so do I. Now please move out of the way. We do not want to be late. But Mrs. Mulberry didn't budge, and when Mrs. Petal tried to step around her, she blocked the way again. If Pearl gets to be an apprentice, then my daughter should get to be an apprentice too. Victoria! The back window of Mrs. Mulberry's car rolled down, and Victoria Mulberry peered out. What? She asked, pushing her thick glasses up her nose. Pearl groaned. Victoria Mulberry was her least favorite person in the world. She spent most of her life tattling on Pearl, and she'd never invited Pearl to one of her birthday parties. Victoria, sweetie, Mrs. Mulberry called, would you like to be an apprentice for Dr. Wu? No. But Pearl is going to be an apprentice for Dr. Wu. I don't care. Sunlight glinted off Victoria's blue braces. Mrs. Mulberry stomped over to the car. Listen to me, Victoria Bernice Mulberry. I want to know why Dr. Wu keeps that gate locked and why no one has seen her. And I want to know what really made that growling sound. And I think she's hiding something. And I don't like it when people try to hide things from me. If you work as her apprentice, then you can help me find out what's going on. I don't want to. Well, I am your mother, and I want you to. Mrs. Mulberry scrambled back into the driver's seat. We'll go home, and you can change into that pretty pink dress, the one you wore when you accepted the Buttonville Welcome Wagon Student of the Year Award. And then we will demand that Dr. Wu meet you and give you an apprenticeship. Welcome Wagon Student of the Year? Pearl snorted. More like Welcome Wagon Pest of the Year. As the car drove away, Victoria glared at Pearl as if the whole thing was Pearl's fault. That is a horrid woman, Mrs. Petal said, but you are a wonderful girl, and she kissed Pearl's cheek. Come on, Pearl urged as she pointed at her plastic dollar store watch. It's almost 8 o'clock.